Once again, hello and a warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us today. So today, normally, Micha and I will talk about one of our favorite services in Azure, namely Azure Bastion. But as you all see, due to some work circumstances, I will be presenting this session and this talk on my own today. Session is titled Azure Bastion. One does not simply walk into my Vnet. It's an updated version of a previous session that Micha and I presented towards, I think it was the end of 2021. But in the meantime, Bastion has a lot of new features, which is why we created this second version of the session. And I hope that by the end of the session, everyone who's not yet using Azure Bastion will start using it. Before I start, let me also thank Jake and John for setting up this meeting and this monthly meetup. And of course, thank them for allowing us to, me to deliver this talk. So on the agenda today, the things we'll be talking about, I will be talking about. To begin with, I will look at the common VM administrative access methods, the different ways, good ones and the bad ones, on how you can connect to your Azure EAS VMs, either alongside or before you implemented Azure Bastion. Then I will talk about what Azure Bastion is, take a closer look at the deployment, configuration, automation, and of course, how you can use it. And lastly, probably if time permits, we probably still have some time for a Q&A where I would love to answer any of your questions, or we can just leave it to Gandalf, or another thing you can do, just ping Micha on Twitter or LinkedIn, and he will answer. So, before we start, also, let me shortly introduce myself. I've been on a talk previously for this meetup, so I'm still with Matthijs, still living in Belgium, working as an Azure technical advisor for a company called Proximus, and now morely Proximus NXT. I'm also a board member of a Belgian user group called MC2MC. I'm also delivering all kind of Azure-related trainings as an MCT, and since a few years, I'm also a Microsoft Azure MVP. If you ever want to connect, just want to say hi, ask a question related to Bastion, Arc, or whatever, you can always contact me through my socials. You can find them on the screen right now. To make it a little bit easier, we also put a QR code in there, so you will be directly connected to our LinkedIn page. And normally I would be joined by Micha, but he's not here today. But you can, if you ever want to reach out to him, it's also on the screen right now. So with that all being said, I think we can now start focusing on our first topic, where I will look into the most frequently used VM administrative access methods. So, as most of you will know, the most straightforward yet least secure method to connect to an Azure VM is through the use of a public IP address, a PIP. By associating a new or an existing PIP with your VM's network interface, you can then establish an RDP or SSH connecting, depending on whether it's a Windows or Linux VM. But let us say this approach is okay when you're studying for any of other Azure exam, or you need to test things out or experiment in your own Azure environment. But you should never, and I can't repeat this enough, under any circumstances use it to connect to any of your Azure production or even development environments, to connect to any of your business or even development VMs. And the reason is that one or both of these management ports will be exposed to the internet, making your VM quite vulnerable to various malicious attackers such as hackers, script kiddies, cyber criminals, or like you can see on the screen right now, orcs, who can then breach your VM using that method. Another method of connecting to your EAS VMs, an older method, is by deploying them behind an Azure external load balancer. In this scenario, instead of the VM, the load balancer then uses the PIP. However, in Micha's and my opinion, this approach, how do we call it most of the time, can be considered as relying on security through obscurity, because one or both of those management ports, 3389 or 22, still will remain accessible through the internet. Only now there's an external load balancer acting as a front end. And so again, not really a secure method to access or connect to your EAS VMs in any production, pre-production, development, or even QA environment, because those malicious actors will still can take advantage of techniques such as port scanning, brute force attacks, DDoS attacks, and then compromise your systems. And for instance, in the case of such a successful brute force attack, an attacker, for example, can easily gain control over the VM and thus establishing a foothold into your environment. And from there, we can do whatever they want to do. Then they're already inside and they can spin up some other new VMs, crypto mining VMs, cryptic mining malware, and so on and so on. And believe me, this happens quite a lot, to be honest. So, and to make it even more clear that this is probably not the best way to foresee access to any of your VMs, Azure VMs, if you have opened one or both of those management ports via an inbound rule in an associated network security group, which you can see on the screen right now is called NSG, very bad ID, we could even say. And you open that NSG in the name field, you will notice that there will be an orange hazard triangle containing an exclamation mark. And by this, Microsoft is already visually indicating that there is quite a huge security risk by opening these ports to the internet. So I think they can't advise it even better than this. So really keep in mind a bad idea. Now, the crucial question that mostly arises then is, but how do we then connect in a secure way to any of our Azure VMs? Well, to begin with, one option is to utilize site-to-site VPN or an express route. In this way, you can connect from your on-premises environment through a secure tunnel through the gateway to one of your VMs. So quite secure then. It's a private tunnel. You set it up by yourself, and the connection is quite secure. And in addition to those two options, you can also consider using a point-to-site VPN. And this allows you to establish a secure connection directly from a client PC, once again to the virtual network gateway, and then you can connect on the private IP of the VM. This client PC can be your own laptop device, or it can even be a POW or a privileged access workstation somewhere in your company environment. To dig a little bit deeper into the point-to-site VPN connection story, these days you have a few options to choose from. Firstly, there's the point-to-site VPN with certificate-based authentication. This method even allows self-signed certificates. So if you need to do some testing or play around in your own environment, I mostly myself do it through those self-signed certificates. It really costs no money. You don't need to buy a certificate from the certificate authority. You can do it yourself. If you ever want to do it, on my blog, there's a PowerShell script on there that can easily configure those for you and even set up that point-to-site connection. Next to that one, you also have radius connection, but almost nobody is using that these days. But luckily, there's also a more modern way where you can use Azure AD authentication with your point-to-site VPN. And when you configure this, you need to choose OpenVPN SSL as a tunnel type and Azure Active Directory as an authentication type. Then ensure that you specify the correct tenant, audience, and issuer. And you also need to give admin consent for the Azure VPN to be used as an enterprise application. And then quite simple to connect from your client device. So your home laptop, for example, you can simply browse to the Microsoft Store, and download the Azure VPN clients from there. You can also push it out if it's company related through Intune or whatever, so that's already there when a user tries to connect. And then you just configure it by using an Azure VPN config XML file, which can also be prepared by somebody from IT and pushed out together with that Azure VPN client. If you need to do it yourself, you can easily find that VPN client package through the Azure portal, but I will show you in the next demo. And then you can download it from there, import that XML, and that's almost it. Next to all those previously mentioned options, and that PIP, not a good one. That external load balancer, also not a good one. Point to site, express route, site VPN, all quite good and quite secure. But some companies, even these days, still use a jump box or jump post, or even jump server, like some of them like to name it. And mostly this jump box is a Windows IaaS or even a Linux IaaS server, which is used to access and manage all the other VMs inside the Azure environment. And you kind of jump from that VM to all your other VMs to manage them. So you first connect to that one, and then you jump over and do your stuff on the servers you need to manage. Most of the time, to connect such a jump box, most companies still use a PIP. However, it's also quite important to consider that using a jump box introduces it's an additional resource you implement into your environment, and you also need to regularly update that one. You need to back it up, and if it fails, you need to troubleshoot it, and so on and so on. And even when you, for example, want to foresee high availability, so we have one node, you need to have two. Then you also have to deploy two of them, and the price will go up, and you need to manage two of them, etc., etc., etc. But in case you did it, you set one up. So we have that VM with that PIP in front. It's your jump box. Although I said in the beginning, you're using a PIP to connect to your VM, there is a way to better protect or secure that one and enhance its security. And this is with the use of just-in-time VM access, or shortly called JIT. For people unfamiliar with JIT, it offers the ability to restrict inbound traffic at the network level by blocking traffic to specific management ports like those used by RDP or SSH, so 3389 or 22. And in the meantime, it also limits the duration which these management ports are open with a maximum setting of 24 hours. So you specify a rule, you set it to 3 hours, and now you, for example, specify it for port 22 or port 3389. You can even specify specific IP address ranges, but I will show you, it will be more clearer in the demo. Just know that if you want to use JIT, it's only available when you're using Microsoft Defender for Cloud, and it shall be with Server Plan 2, if I'm completely correct. But let us quickly demo it. So normally, I think, Jake, my portal should be showing. If false, okay, it's there. So I will show you. I will go to my virtual machines, global search bars, click on one of them. This one is specifically my management subscription. You can see I have an admin server over there. I have two domain controllers, and I have a jump server. As you can see, all of them have a private IP somewhere in a subnet, in my hub, for example. And you can see that jump server also has a PIP. So it has the address 20, and so on and so on. If I now go to Microsoft Defender for Cloud, I can click through it from over here, scroll down, and then underneath cloud security, you will find workload protections. Normally, it takes quite a few moments for loading, and luckily in my demo, it goes quite fast. If you scroll down, you will see a button called Just-in-Time VM Access. You can simply click on that one, and you have a few options: configured, not configured, unsupported. Under once configured, you can see I already have 4 VMs using JIT. One of them is that 022 and to those two domain controllers and that admin server, you can, if you in your environment have some VMs running, even if it's in other subscriptions that have not configured this one, they will pop up over there. And if there are some VMs not supported, yeah, for using JIT, they will also show up over here. So quite simply, it's configured on port 3389. If I edit, for example, you see it's a Windows VM, only port 3389 is allowed. And it can come from everywhere. So because of this, if I now go to that specific VM, just simply click on it. Let me make this screen. Click on connect. You will see normally this VM has just-in-time VM access policy. What you then need to do is first request access. Just click on that specific button. It will start requesting the access. In the back, it will put extra inbound rule in that specific NSG coupled on that specific subnet. And after around 1 minute, you're able to connect to that VM. Because it's a public one, I can simply download the RDP. We'll say keep that one, open the file. Let me move over here. And normally, if the time window is already okay, if I click connect, I get this and I can simply fill in my super secret password. And I should be able, like you can see, connect to it. It's as easy like that. And to show you, I'm connecting over the public IP. It's a 20 address. Let me close that one. If I then, for example, would go to the NSG, let me open that one. I think it's this one. That one is linked to the subnet where the specific VM is part of. And if you go to inbound security rules, you can see there is a rule for that specific inbound private IP address of that specific VM allowing connectivity over 338 now at the moment. So that's why I can use it. If that time window of 3 hours is passed, that rule will automatically will be gone or set to disabled. It's easy like that. It will cost you 15 euros for each. I don't know exactly in pounds to protect any of your VMs, but if you're still using a jump box with a pip, it's almost the best way to protect it. But let us go back to our session now and to the slides. But now for the real stuff, we already had quite a few options to connect to your VMs, bad ones, worst ones, and even almost good ones. But there's also a better way to do it through Azure Bastion. And yeah, we start explaining how we can now securely connect to any of your Azure VMs through Bastion. If you look at the definition, Azure Bastion is a PaaS service that you provision inside your virtual network, and it provides secure and seamless RDP SSH connectivity to your Azure virtual machines directly in the Azure portal or over SSL. Quite a long sentence, but let us explain and look a little bit deeper and look at it from a technical point of view. We can say, once again, it's a PaaS services that serves as a jump box provision in your Vnet and preferably your hub Vnet. And its primary purpose is to provide secure RDP or SSH access to your IaaS VMs directly through the Azure portal. So you just open the Azure portal and from there you connect to your VMs. You don't do it to an RDP file you need to download or whatever. You simply go through the Azure portal. And when you use Azure Bastion, your Azure VMs themselves no longer need a PIP for connectivity. And you also eliminate the need of any RDP or SSH clients on your client device. So you don't need to have anything on the device that's connecting. You can simply go to the Azure portal. So in a way, it offers a complete clientless and even agentless experience. You can simply think of it as a hardened access point built up in the back by a VM scale set that in a way safeguard your Azure VMs from port scanning, zero-day exploits, and even malware targeting. So quite a bunch. And at the moment, you have 2 SKUs, which are both generally available. You also now have a third one, but this one is still in private preview. So I will not really mention that one, because if you need to have access to it, you need to request that private preview and so on and so on. So first of all, you have the basic SKU, which already has quite a few features, like connecting to your Linux and Unix VMs, and even have VM audio output. Not that spectacular, but already something. Then you also have the standard SKU, which will provide you with, how would we say it, with a full option package, like, for example, using a native client to connect, use shareable link, and even the option, if you require that one, maybe from a security perspective, to even change the custom inbound port. So you don't want to use 3389.22, you want to change it to something else. You can do it whenever you start using the standard SKU. How does Azure Bastion work? Quite easy. Bastion lives it in its own subnet. It's called the Azure Bastion subnet. For example, in your hub Vnet, where only port 443, so SSL, is exposed to the internet. And through your Bastion host, you connect with RDP 3389 or SSH22 to the private IP address of your VMs. So all of your Azure VMs you're connecting to in that way don't require any public IP anymore. So more secure, no pips, and also, yeah, less expensive, because those pips are already gone, which are not that expensive anymore, but yeah. And one more important thing to mention, and which wasn't shown on the previous screen, is that in the beginning, you require the Bastion host to connect to any VM in a specific Vnet. Every Vnet had to have his own Bastion host. So peering wasn't allowed. Luckily, Azure Bastion is now combinable with Vnet peering, and it must say it works really like a charm. And because of this, hopefully a lot of people were still using IaaS services, working a kind of a hub-spoke architecture. And because of this, you can deploy your Azure Bastion in the Azure Bastion subnet in your hub. And from there, you can set up peerings to all those different VNets. So like you can see, let me get my laser point. This one is peered. You can connect to all these VMs. This one is peered. You can connect to all these VMs, and you can see your Azure Bastion lives in the Azure Bastion subnet inside of the hub. And because all of these are peered and peering works, you can connect to any of these VMs without setting up different Bastion hosts for every subscription, VNet, or whatever. So you require just one Bastion setup for your complete environment if you peer everything, of course. Also good to know, and a question we get quite a lot, to be honest. What are use cases? Well, first scenario, for example, if these days when there is no availability of a site-to-site VPN, point-to-site VPN, or even an express route, and it is mostly relevant in a cloud-only environment where you still need the secure connecting if you're still using Azure IaaS VMs. Another use case involves situations where, for example, a jump box is not suitable due to restrictions on port 3389 or 22 for access, or where the higher cost associated with implementing a highly available setup are blocking factors. So they don't want to set up 2-3 jump hosts. They just want to set something up that can be quickly deployed and also be removable without too much hassle and management overhead. So they don't want to manage anything anymore, don't want to see updates, and so on and so on. And furthermore, some companies also have security requirements. Maybe they have a CISO in-house and they demand the use of HTTPS to connect. So everything needs to be over port 443, or maybe there's just a customer that just wants to have a PaaS solution to connect to his VMs. So all those options are available. And in all those situations, I think Azure Bastion is quite a valid solution. if you set it up, spin it up when you need to use it, because the pricing is, we will dig a little bit deeper in the pricing. I think it's the next slide. But if you start it up as a standard SKU, enable specific features when you require those, and otherwise run it as a basic SKU, and so on and so on. And that's the whole automation part of it. Of course, pricing, quite an important point, I think. As I just mentioned, I put it in pounds. I hope it's correct. So, for example, if you want to use the Azure Bastion SKU in Zone 1, UK South is part of Zone 1, it's around £112. Basic, the standard SKU, already pricing a little bit higher, £171. And then, don't forget, let me drink a little bit. You also have a specific price for the amount of data transfers outbound. For the first 5 gigs, which is more than suitable for most small companies, the first gigs are free, and then you can see prices will go up depending on the amount of data that goes through it. It will smaller and smaller, and a final exception, if you ever run over 500 terabytes, you need to contact Azure sales, because probably they set the price to 0. But never had one customer ever had that high amount of outbound data, to be honest. Also keep in mind, if you use the Azure standard SKU, you start off with 2, but you can, if the month requires it, you can add extra scale units. And if you add a scale unit, pricing will go up with £82 for each scale unit you add. And if there's some people working in different regions and so on, pricing can also differ if you're running Azure Bastion in the Zone 1 or Zone 2 region. It's not that big of a difference anymore, but we just wanted to mention it. There can be a slight differently, mostly in the outbound data transfer related to pricing. Before going into some smaller demos related to Azure Bastion, I also want to look into some extra features and possibilities that Azure Bastion with the standard queue foresees for connecting to your VMs. First of all, there is, I think it's the most new feature called Azure Shareable Link. Simply said, a shareable link is a link that, the word says itself, you can share, which allows the user who receives that link, it can be an internal or even an external user, to connect to the Azure Bastion session even without accessing the Azure portal. So he receives the links, clicks on it, and the user will be redirected to his Azure portal, and after proper authentication, he or she can directly connect to the VM using Azure Bastion without all those other stuff he needs to do or she needs to do. And for example, this feature comes in handy during all kind of IT projects or support cases where, for example, temporary or one-time access is required to perform any kind of administrative or troubleshooting tasks. So maybe a third party needs to connect to a specific Azure VM, just create a shareable link, give it, see that they can authenticate, they do their stuff, remove the link, and work is done and security is back like it should be. Another one next to the shareable link, these days you can also connect, keep in mind standard SKU also, to any of your Azure VMs, Windows, Linux, through a native RDP or SSH client on your local computer, using Azure CLI, which will allow you, depending on the connection type and client, to even upload or download files. Because if you do it through the portal, connecting through Azure Bastion, you can copy and paste text, but you still can't put any file on your desktop right into the VM itself, like you can do with any other RDP connection. If you require that one, you need to connect through the native client. To make it a little bit easier, I wrote 2 blog posts related to it. I created also 2 scripts, one for Windows VMs, the other one for the Linux VMs. You simply run the script. In the end, as parameter, you add the specific VM name, and it will connect you. It will take some time because CLI needs to be in place, etc., etc. That's some prerequisites, but If you ever want to use it in a simple way, look at this and you will probably get it up and running. But let me demo some stuff. Huh? So let me go to my Azure portal. It should be showing. I will show you I have a Bastion host in place. So simply type in the global search bar Bastion. Bastion. You can see I have one Bastion host at the moment. Quite easy. It's connected to my hub Vnet. Lives in the Azure Bastion subnet. It has a pip connected to it, all following my naming convention. It also has some tags. One important tag I always add to an Azure Bastion deployment is the one that specifies the Vnet. So it's connected to the Vnet, and that way I always directly know to which Vnet it's connecting. So you see, I have a Bastion host in place. My hub Vnet, I can show you if I go to virtual networks. I have my hub Vnet. I have quite a lot of peerings, so it's connected to every Vnet I have in my other subscriptions. And I have some VMs running. Let me go to a VM, not in my management subscription, but one in my corp. So completely different subscription. You can see I have 3 web VMs. Let us take this one. As you can see, it's a Windows VM. If I want to use Bastion, for example, I just click on Connect. There's no just-in-time access in place. I just go to the Bastion tab, use Bastion, quite easy. It opens. You can also specify some specific connection settings. If you change that specific port, you can change it over here. You can change the protocol, and these days you can even change the inside the VM, the keyboard you're using. So maybe you're connecting to a VM deployed somewhere in the UK, and I want to use the Azure Belgium keyboard, for example, etc. You can change it over here. Just simply type in your username. I think it's this one. Let me see. Authentication type password, and you just type in your password and click on connect. What happens? Another tab will open. Normally, I already connected to this one. You get a pop-up where you need to click on allow, and you will go through. And you can see I have an RDP connection through my Windows VM without doing anything else, directly from inside the Azure portal. I can do all my things. I can go to the application widget, just like with all, whenever you do an RDP connection. The other thing is that copy and paste. If I would type something over here in Notepad, for example, or my Visual Studio, I can copy that code and it will open over here. Another option is I can open a full screen. So quite a few options. This is a Windows VM. Mostly I always get the question, and what about Linux, of course? I have another web server running. You can see it's an Ubuntu running Linux, of course. Once again, you can see no public address, just like the other one, just private IP address. You just, once again, click on connect. Also go to Bastion, use Bastion. You can use private key. For this one, I configured a password to keep it a little bit simpler. So once again, same username, type in the password. Let me see that I typed incorrectly. And simply click on connect. Another tab will open and you will see Linux, tada. And because I'm always happy that I could connect to my Linux VM, I mostly start dancing, but I will leave this to my little friend, this one. So it works. As a Bastion admin, of course, you have some options to manage. So those 2 connections are still open. So maybe there somebody of the Azure administrator is connected. Now it's all in the same screen, but think about it like that. I can go to Bastion, click on that one. Select all my subscriptions, of course. Go to my Bastion host, and you have the option of sessions underneath settings. And you will see, if you give it a few moments, that there are 2 connections open. If I want to drop those, for example, you can see one is REP, the other one is SSH. I was connected to Windows and Linux one. If you just delete it, both of them, the connections will drop. So normally this one, you can see I can't do anything anymore in this one. So the only option I have as an administrator is to close it. And I can even do the same thing for the Linux VM. If I delete that one, you can see my parrot is hanging. So few options as an administrator, but let us go back to the slides to look in some deployments. Let me first open the screen again. It should be showing. Another thing, deployment and configuration. First of all, with every deployment in Azure, it's best to check if Azure Bastion is available in your region. Normally it's available in all regions, but the only thing I noticed, especially in South Africa, for example, we already delivered this talk for South African user group, and they didn't have all features available in all SKUs. So there was a difference, but normally for us in the European area, it's normally everything should be available. Next to that, also, just like with any other Azure environment and deployment, specify a good name for the Bastion resource and all of its resources, which of course follows your naming convention and Azure governance plans. Also specify the tags. I already said you can use that Vnet tag to specify the Vnet the Azure Bastion host belongs to. Then before you deploy your Bastion host, you can also create that specific subnet, that Azure Bastion subnet. The only thing you need to remember, it always needs to be at least a /26. And if you deploy that subnet in advance, you can also already protect it through an NSG. Just keep in mind, if you're already at that NSG, all necessary inbound and outbound security rules should be in place. Otherwise, your deployment will fail. Also, keep in mind that if you, for example, like most enterprise environment these days, are using Azure Firewall or any other NVA, that you don't associate the Azure Bastion subnet in any route table, because then you will probably block some necessary traffic for your Azure Bastion to work. Been there, done that, seen that. So just don't do it. Next to that, these days you can also combine Azure Bastion with Azure Private DNS zones. The only thing you should keep an eye on is the zone name, because it may not overlap with any of those internally used name endpoints, like I think it's management, azure.com, and that whole list. Next to that, like you already saw, the Bastion host also requires a static PIP. It needs to be a standard public IP SKU with a regional tier, so you can also deploy that one in front. And then when all those things are in place, you can start deploying your Bastion host. You can do it through the Azure portal, not the best way to do it, but if you never use it, probably test it out in that way. You can use Azure PowerShell, Azure CLI, or use ARM, Biceps, or even Terraform if you want. It's all available and you can all use it. In this example, for example, you can see my hub Vnet. I have that specific Azure Bastion subnet. Let me get my laser points. It's a /26. You can see there is an NSG attached associated to that specific subnet. And like you can see, I don't have a route table available. So this one works. And yeah, you can see my complete hub Vnet with all its subnets already in there. So for example, a gateway subnet, Azure Firewall subnet, it's all there. And you can see there are some routes from other subnets through that specific Azure Firewall subnet, but not for that specific Azure Bastion subnet. Like just said, you can harden your Azure subnet with an NSG to only allow the necessary inbound and outbound traffic. As you can see on the screen right now, there are quite a lot of inbound rules and outbound rules to require. Most of them to allow ingress traffic that the Azure Bastion control and data plane require, but also to allow ingress traffic to and from the Azure Load Balancer, Next to those inbound rules, there are also some quite outbound rules required. Two of them are needed to allow egress traffic to the target VMs via RDP or SSH, and the other ones are mostly for egress traffic to, I think it's the Azure data plane, and those that are required to communicate with other public endpoints and so on. They're also, for example, required for storing the diagnostic logs if you enable that one, which is the best practice, of course, and the metric. All of them are in there. If you ever need them, I created a complete deployment script. I will mention it later on. And if you want to control it, this one works. You can see also at the end, I put in a 900, and that's just to block all those default ports. So that's the one that will stop and not allowing this one to run, because otherwise it will work, but that's not how an NSG should be configured. And if you ever mismatch some of those in or outbound rules, you will probably get an error like this. Also, if you have set up that NSG or you mount it later and you change one of those rules, that NSG will not work anymore, or you will get an error that you need to adjust something in that NSG. Next to the NSG on the Azure Bastion subnet, it's also advised to apply an NSG to all the subnets in which your Azure VMs are hosted, and which are being accessed by Azure Bastion. You need to do this, especially when you want to apply a good defense in depth strategy, like they say. In that specific NSG, first of all, you should add an inbound security rule that allows the ingress traffic of Azure Bastion on port 3389 or 22. And be sure to only add the Azure Bastion subnet CIDR IP address as a source in the rule. And then, once again, like in the previous NSG, an end inbound rule of 900, which stops the default rules from being applied. Once again, if you easily want to do it through PowerShell, on my blog, there's a script, a blog post explaining it. So if you ever want to do it, just keep in mind, if you're using JIT, this one isn't required, because JIT will create those rules for you. But if you're not using JIT, I would advise to do something like this. Of course, there are also some Azure RBAC rules required when connecting through Bastion, or which you can use to foresee the least privileged access control. At least you should have the reader role on the VM, the NIC, and the private IP of the VM. And of course, on the Azure Bastion host itself and on the Vnet. Luckily, to make it all a little bit easier, you can just assign two predefined building virtual machine Azure login user role at the subscription level. Just know that you need to do this on every Azure subscription where the user needs to have access to the Azure Bastion service to connect to any of your VMs. And next to that role, you also need to assign the user the reader role on the resource group of the Azure Bastion host. So if you create a security group, just add those two, and then add that group to allow which users you want to allow connecting through Azure Bastion to any of your VMs. That's it. Also want to mention that these days you can use Kerberos authentication, which can be used with both SKUs these days. So before this feature, Bastion always connected through the NTLM authentication protocol, but from a security point of view, it's much better to use Kerberos, which you can do now. Just know that if you want to use it, there are a few requirements, and one of them is that you should have an Azure IaaS DNS server in place, or a private DNS resolver these days, and so on. Most you can do it with an IaaS domain controller, because most of them will also fulfill the role of a DNS. Just then add that DNS service basically as a DNS service in every Vnet, and so on and so on. So a few requirements. One of this, DNS needs to be set up like it should be, otherwise it won't work. and then you can give that question, that answer when it's always DNS. That happens when you enable this not correctly. For logging, I always do it. I always do it for any kind of network relating resource in my environments or in customer environments. Also, when I deploy an Azure Bastion host, just enable the log analytics. So when a user connects to workloads using Azure Bastion, Bastion can then log the diagnostics of those remote sessions, and you're able to look into those logs and so on. To configure it, quite easy. Bastion host, if you do it through the portal, of course, go to diagnostic settings, create a name, edit settings, and you require Bastion audit logs, all metrics. And like you can see, I most of the time just send them to my log analytics workspace, which is located in my management subscription. No more, no less, and then all those things will be logged. Important thing, and what about JIT VM access? We talked about it in the previous part, because that was something we could use to better secure the previous connection methods. Good to know is that you can also combine JIT with Azure Bastion. The only thing that you should be aware of is you still need to request access from underneath the RDP SSH tab, and then you can go to the Bastion tab because it's not yet integrated. Still, after this time, you still have to do it like this, and then wait until your connection is approved, and then you can go on. But I can simply demo this one. It's maybe a little bit easier. So let me go back to my virtual machines. The ones in my management environment. If you remember from before, let me show you. I have that Microsoft Defender for Cloud setup, workload protections, and now it takes a little bit longer, of course. Let me see if this one works. It's a little trick, and it works. So just go to your toolbar up top, press enter, and it reloads, and then it's there. Just-in-time VM access. I have my domain controllers. I will show you my rule, and you can see it's only the point-to-site VPN range that's in there, and my Azure Bastion subnet range. 3389 because it's Windows VM for 3 hours. So if I now go back to my VMs, little big trick. Select those one out of my management subscription. That specific domain controller. No, that's not the correct one. I clicked on the wrong one. That's a domain controller. No public IP address, only private IP address. Click on connect, the RDP. You can see VM JIT access policy. Click on request access. It will take a few moments, of course. Request approved. Go to the Bastion tab. Use Bastion once again. Click on it. Username. Now I need to take a longer one. And hopefully I type it correctly. Boom. Nice little trick. You can also store your password in your key vault. Connecting to my management subscription, my key vault, that one is over there. For every subscription, I have a different key vault. I can select my, if I click it correctly, my super secret password, because it's a domain admin, of course. And normally, time will be long enough now. I can click on connect. And if all went well, I'm connected to my domain controller. So, combination of everything, using JIT, combination with Azure Bastion, picking up my password from in the key vault. And if I want to even add an extra layer in front of it, you can work with PIM. So then you really have a complete security in-depth structure. First, authenticate through PIM, get eligible for that specific role, so on, so on. Then ask JIT, then connect, use the right username and password. I need to be able to get that password out of my key vault, otherwise I can't, and so on and so on. So different layers of security to get somewhere. Maybe something I also can show you. If you ever need to troubleshoot Bastion, also something, if you click on that one, Go to the Bastion host. If you look at the configuration, you can switch between basic and standard. If you ever put it on the standard, you can't switch back to the basic. Once again, I solved this with a script. Script, run it, just go to my blog, it runs it, and it rebuilds your Bastion host as a basic. It will give you, takes around 6 minutes, 8 minutes, and your vice versa, and you can go back also. So I can play around with it. If you put it in an Azure function, you get the idea, I think. You can really start using Bastion a lot less cheaper and just spin it up whenever you require it. You can, when the standard queue, you can configure all of these things. This one also see that DNS is in place. Maybe I can show that shareable link if you want. So I've created a shareable link to that specific VM. I can simply copy it, put it in an email, send it out to some administrator from a third party. You just need to paste this one. I don't know. Now I copy it. And it just opens like this. It just needs to fill in username, which you will send through in a secure way, of course. And ta-da, I'm connecting through the shareable link. That's how easy it is to give a third party short access to a specific VM to do their stuff. Those diagnostics are setting up. If your Bastion host sometimes doesn't work or connectivity doesn't work, of course, everybody knows Azure Network Watcher, of course, you can go over there. But even in a Bastion host, you have a connection troubleshoot. Probably seems quite familiar, people using Network Watcher. Just type in the VM, give everything, preferred IP version, destination port, just click on check, and it will work. You can also dig into the metrics, for example. One I mostly use if something doesn't work, Bastion communication status. If this one is set to 1, Bastion is working like it should. If it's set to 0, you need to start troubleshooting. And of course, you have that diagnose and solve problems. It will probably help you. But most of the time, first look if everything is set up like it should be, all features are in place we want to use, and first try out that connection troubleshooter before you start opening a support ticket or whatever. Let me jump back to the last part. It's just 5 minutes, think, max. Automation, I think I already mentioned this one. Complete the deployment script. I'm rewriting this one in Biceps also. It will set up the subnet, the NSG. It will create a Bastion host, create a PIP, all following a specific naming convention. It will configure those diagnostic settings, like you can see if I have my laser pointing. We'll also put a lock on the resource group, add all the tags, so everything in one simple script. If you ever want to use it, look at it and write it on your own way. You can pick things out of it. There also, Bastion has a specific price. Like I said, I'm also using this one in my scripts in combination with an Azure function. So I can spin up a standard queue, basic queue, and vice versa. And I can let them spin up from during business hours. So maybe at 7 p.m., at 7 a.m. in the morning, my Bastion host gets deployed. And at 6 p.m. in the evening, it drops. So it will already half the pricing of the month price of a Bastion host, because it's the pricing is based on the hours, so no longer on a complete price. So it's just the amount of hours you use it, you pay for. But definitely look at these two community people's blog. One of them is deployment through a logic app, and the other one is also through a function with their own setup. But you can look at my script and combine it. But definitely look at both of them. And then for closing off, just a few key takeaways about the session of today. Simply said, Azure Bastion is a PaaS server that you provision inside your virtual network, and that will give you secure and seamless RDP SSH connectivity to your VMs directly from the Azure portal over SSL. Whenever you start using Azure Bastion, there's no need to configure a PIP to any of your VMs. Keep in mind that these days you only require one Bastion host. if you set up your hub and spoke through peering, so hub V network, peer to all your other VNets in your environment, even different subscriptions and so on. And of course, harden your Bastion, use that NSG, specify those least privileged access through security groups and RBAC, use Kerberos if your DNS is set up like it should be, and especially if you're using Microsoft Defender for Cloud, use JIT and PIMA if you have that. Definitely use all of them. And last but not least, it has a specific price at the end of the month. So definitely keep an eye on your cloud spend and try to automate the use of Azure Bastion. Try to switch from the standard to the basic SKU and use those features whenever those are required. And try to use scripts and automation to using them all, I think. And with that being said, I also put some references in there. That's even the old ones. Probably the link still works, I hope. And we want to thank you. Also have to thank you all to my co-speaker who isn't there today, but yeah, it's a session of both of us, and yeah, we always love to talk about Azure Bastion. And if you ever have a question to any of the things we talked about, at this day I talked about today, just ping us on Twitter, LinkedIn. We're always happy to help. And with that being said, any questions? Because I didn't look at the chat, so I don't know if any questions have arrived. Jake, I don't know if you followed them up.
I have to confess, I've been frantically pasting links into the chat throughout with some of the things.
Yeah, normally Mika, we switch and we do it ourselves, but if you're talking all the time, I can't do it. Yeah, they're all there.
That was an awesome session. Thank you very much.
I think
really interesting.
You need to look at that one if you want to use that client tools from on-prem. They changed something in the back, so probably I need to look at those two scripts again. So if you want to connect to one of your Linux VMs through an SSH client on your local device or through the RDP client on your local device, I think I need to look at one of them. I think think they changed something because like they do quite a lot.
It always keeps you on your toes, doesn't it?
Yeah, it keeps you busy.
Yeah. No, it was really a fantastic session. So thank you very much. Really interesting to see. I have to confess, I didn't know about the shareable links feature, and from like a support perspective or something like that.
Quite a lot of people don't know about it. It's in our tips and tricks session at the end of the month also.
Nice.
Because that's the most easy way to give a third-party connection to a VM without too many hassles.
Makes it very easy.
Give me 5 seconds, create a temporary username and password, give it 3 hours, drop it, fill that specific username and password, and done.
Yeah, very, very straightforward. I guess just open the floor up. Anybody else, if you have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or
I think
or shout them out.
To 60 minutes if I counted correctly.
Literally, to the minute. Yeah, it's really.
I wasn't looking at the time. It was just.
Cool. I don't think we've got any more questions. I think I mentioned
almost everything I can mention, I think.
No, it was, as I say, that was an amazing run through. So thank you. Really, really awesome. We'll get the recording saved, and John can do his YouTube
do you need the slide deck? Because we're happy to share it if you want.
If you're happy to share, we'll get a link to it in the YouTube
send it
channel.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome stuff. Well, we'll close off there. So thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Vim, for the Bastion presentation. Awesome as always. Really appreciate you joining us. And hope to chat to you again soon.
Yep.
Thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Okay.